I'm Anthony Maricola. I'm the manager of Adult and Information Services here at the Ferguson. Welcome you to the and Lindsay Dow. We want to thank them. Elm Street Books is here selling copies of The Creativity Cure and Life Unscripted. We want to thank them for their continued support as well. I'll now introduce our moderator, Lindsay Dow, who will then introduce our panelists. Lindsay Dow joined Silver Hill, New York as program director in 2024. In this role, she has led a team to pioneer the use of quantitative psychiatry for the outpatient treatment of complex mental health and substance use disorders. She's also the founder of Tetricus Labs, a psychiatric technology company that builds the platform to enable this groundbreaking treatment. She has earned a BA and an MBA from Yale University, but perhaps most important of all, Lindsay is a certified peer specialist, passionate about leveraging her own journey through psychiatric treatment to improve the lives and outcomes of others. Thank you, Lindsay, for being with us tonight.
Maybe? Oh, yeah. There it is. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming out tonight. This is a really exciting topic, creativity and psychiatry, mental health. I wanted to briefly sort of share a little bit more about my story and how creativity sort of played a role in sort of mental illness and recovery for me before introducing our panelists. So my journey was a long one through the psychiatric system. Many people's are. I first was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at 14 years old and then spent the next 10 years of my life as a total treatment failure, in and out of the hospital, multiple doctors, multiple medications, until finally at 24, I sort of hit a wall. And I had a doctor who basically said, look, I'm the world leading expert in bipolar disorder and there's nothing else we can do. And I sort of didn't want to stop living, but I had a total lack of vision for what life could be like without mental illness. And I think that's why creativity is such an important topic, because a lot of what, in my experience, recovery is having a vision for what life could be like, how things could be different, what your identity could be if things resolved or changed, and where you can go with that. And so my background has almost zero art in it. That's the one course I failed in any of my schooling. But I think this is such a great topic to bring in. And so, luckily I got a vision and was able to sort of get to the right treatment and find a place like Silver Hill, where I now run a program that envisions what life can really be like for patients with serious mental illness and complex needs. Dr. Carrie Barron is the psychiatrist in charge of that program at Silver Hill, New York, so I'll introduce you first. Dr. Carrie Barron is an associate professor of medical education at Dell Medical School at the University of Texas at Austin, and also has a private practice in New York City in addition to her role at Silver Hill, New York. She has published in peer-reviewed journals, won several academic awards, and presented original works on creativity and psychoanalysis at national meetings of the American Psychoanalytic Association. And perhaps most excitingly, she's also the author of The Creativity Cure. Thank you for joining us. And Dr. Jeff Katzman's lifelong work has been to help patients overcome the isolation that informs so many modern lives. He studied human biology at Stanford University as an undergraduate and then went on to medical school at the University of California, San Diego, before completing his psychiatry residency training at the UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute. His study of contemporary psychodynamic theory has included certification in the Adult Attachment Interview, the Institute of Contemporary Psychoanalysis Psychotherapy Program, intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy, and mentalization-based therapy. Lots of words. Dr. Katzman is also the director of the Silver Hill Academy for Research and Education, also known as SHARE, at Silver Hill Hospital, and the author of multiple books, including Life Unscripted, which is on sale over there as well. So, thank you both for being here. Why don't we start with perhaps the hardest question, which is, what does creativity mean to you, and how did you get into creativity as an idea? Maybe we start with you, Dr. Katzman.
That little button there. I'm already being creative. I got it on. I come from a creative family. My grandfather was a big Hollywood producer, made a movie a week with Elvis Presley and westerns, and it came from beneath the sea. And they said, "You have a heart. Stay far away from this business." So I was kind of kept away. And although I kind of always thought of myself as a creative soul, I went to medical school and it was great, but I thought, kind of, what am I doing here? There's something that's not fulfilled within me. And when I was an intern, I was dared by a friend to take an improv class. Second City had just moved to Santa Monica, and they challenged people in the audience to audition for the improv class. So I think around 250 of us showed up. And I got a call the next day, on a rotary phone. This was a while ago. And they said, "You made it into the improv class." And I went. And I think there were 250 people there who we had our checkbooks. And Second City was off in LA. But I learned there a lot about interacting with people and what happens in something like this. And I had calculus and ancient history and all these classes, but nobody ever told me, like, what do you do when you meet somebody in the market? Or when you're on a stage with a mic and you don't know where you're going, and suddenly, or when you're a therapist and you don't necessarily have a script. And I started realizing that the skills that improvisers have are very applicable to life. So that was my first kind of experience with real creativity that we then brought to working with Vietnam veterans and patients with serious mental illness. And so, that was my first, was an interpersonal experience of building something. And it involved collaboration, and breaking the scripts that we have, we're born with, and learning that we can actually open up a little bit more into the world, to the muses that are around us.
How about you, Carrie? Oh, there you go. Yep, try it again.
Hear me? Yeah. Hi. So the question is, how did I get to be interested in creativity? It's interesting that you brought up your family. I hadn't thought of saying that, but so I grew up, we were 8 cousins, and I was second to youngest, and the older cousins were painter, actor, photographer, curator, and I just remember being sort of envious because they always had these really interesting conversations at holidays, and I felt kind of excluded from that because I was too young. But what I realized was I realized early on that there was kind of a lift to them. There was this sort of a joy, a passion, a dedication. There was something about the way they moved through the world, like that they had meaning and purpose, something that was very close to their heart. And I just, one of my favorite quotes is, "Creativity was the original antidepressant." And I just think that that's actually true. For some people can be. So I don't know, I guess when I was a resident in medical school, or a medical student and a resident, I just started reading everything I could about creativity and mental health, and what does it do for people? How can it help with anxiety and depression? If you're too depressed, can you actually make something? Or when you can't even get out of bed, like, how can you use creativity to, to get vitality in your everyday life? So that's what interested me.
See, the word creativity has now come up probably 10,000 times so far. So what does creativity mean to you?
Oh, well, I automatically go to the definitions that are in my head. So one of my favorites is problem solving. Another one is connecting the dots. I think that was Steve Jobs. My favorite is Rollo May, a psychologist in the 50s, who said, "Bringing something new into being." And I love that because it might be a painting, it might be a song, but it might be a business program. It might be rice and beans. I had a patient who, she talked about her rice and beans. And, it could be just rearranging your home, tending to your home. That's creative because you're applying instinct, intuition, aesthetic to your everyday life. And I think that's what it is. When we have the agency and the autonomy to do that, I think it can be uplifting. And also, I will say, because this is what the book was based on, purposeful hand use has been shown to elevate mood. So even if it's just like cleaning your child's room because you want to make it beautiful for them, or there's a story about a janitor that went into a hospital room of a patient and, redid the, I don't know, adjusted the frames, vacuumed extra times because she was terminally ill. It's bringing your soul and yourself into an action. So I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I think for me also, creativity involves a spark of curiosity, and I think that's how we get to it. Not I'm going to be a famous painter or I'm going to be a this, but I wonder if I stopped in the hallway and had a conversation with this person rather than just saying, hey, Bob, hey, Jeff, how you doing? I'm good. How are you? I'm good, and went our ways, but actually engaged for a moment. What would happen in that moment? And in that moment, something is born, something between us that is, I think, creative, that starts with wonder and curiosity. Just like you were asking me about myself, that curiosity, I think, brings us closer, and it sparks a sense of who we are. I also think it begins to help us shed who we think we are. Like, I think I'm this kind of person. I'm not an athlete. I'm not smart. I'm a good chess player. Whatever those things are that we learned growing up. Your brothers are this and you're that. You should be a this. They put us in a little box, and I think creativity is the key to unscripting a little bit and to loosening. And so to me, creativity is beginning to wonder what's outside that box.
You're sort of talking a little bit about identity, right? Sort of identity discovery, identity development. Can you say a little bit more about perhaps how creativity has worked for you or for your practice in terms of helping people find themselves?
Yeah, I had the honor for 10 years of being at the VA, both in West Los Angeles and in Albuquerque. And in West LA, I was in charge of a residential program for Vietnam veterans, and they had groups all week. So it was kind of a welcome home program. After exposure, then it was 90 days of this is how you manage a bank account, and this is about relationships. And then on Fridays, I would run this improv group. So these very kind of burnout men who would want to talk about kind of the times when they came home and how they weren't understood. Suddenly, we had a play group. And I had gotten to do this myself with some psychoanalysts and who were meeting in their 80s, improvising together. And so I started this group. And it would always start with, well, where are we going today? And I remember this one time where they said, well, we're going to Planet Pink. And I said, oh, well, what's up at Planet Pink? And they described it. And everybody shared a different quality of Planet Pink, what the mountains look like. And I said, what's the problem at Planet Pink? And they said, a baby was born blue. And then they all created characters around this, and they started interacting, and there was just a raucous laughter. And every week this would happen. So it really made me wonder, are you like this, what we attribute to you in these negative symptoms and withdrawal of nobody understands you, of being a Vietnam veteran? How come we're laughing now as human beings when we're playing, and how can we tap into those moments in our lives?
How do you think that works? What are some of the mechanisms that are working in that kind of therapy?
Yeah, I mean, and I've seen this in a few different settings. I think there is really a relief to get to not be you, you know? We're ourselves all the time. And so to get to be someone else and play around with it is just a little bit of a miracle. Yeah.
And in some ways it helps people find themselves a little bit more deeply?
Yeah, and find also the experience of presence and being and spontaneity that we sometimes choke off because we think this isn't who I am.
Yeah. You mentioned when we were talking earlier that there are certain improv tricks to try to unscript and to create that play. Are there any that you can sort of share with us, or? Yeah,
so we, the kind of the most commonly known improv guideline is to say yes and when we're building a story. If someone says, hey George, that's a great head of red hair you have. Suddenly I'm George with red hair. I can't say, no, I'm Bob and I'm bald. That's not how it goes. I'm George and I have red hair, and and we're building something together, a new reality. So you're saying yes, and when we make mistakes, that's the greatest thing of all. So mistakes are gifts, and they're opportunities. Those are a couple, and probably the best is the goal of an improviser working with somebody else on stage is to make their partner look good, and to really focus and learn to be curious about another person.
So I know as a psychoanalyst also, how does creativity come into your work?
Yeah. So psychoanalysis is really about freeing the mind and creating an inner state so that you're comfortable with what rushes through you, whether it's fears, anger, anxiety, joy, pleasure, to try to sort of what we say soften the superego or not have so much guilt about whatever is moving through you. Because if you can have that kind of spontaneous kind of letting within, then you apply it to relationships or your work, there's a way in which you're more able to be happy. You might have happier moments, or you might feel motivations more easily. There isn't as much suppression and oppression of yourself. So that's how that works. And the other thing I wanted to say, because you were talking about identity, and I feel this so deeply because I'm seeing this right now with our population. We have an intensive outpatient program at Silver Hill, New York, for people in recovery who've struggled with substances. And one of the themes, that we're seeing is that, I don't want to be that person anymore. And how do I become a different person? What do I need to do? It's so hard to show up to my life every day when I don't know how to be there and I have no crutch to lean on that I'm used to. And maybe I did things that I don't feel good about or people criticize me for. So really, how do you sort of create a new identity that's genuine and true to you, that you can really feel alive in, and that's real, and yet really might have very little to do with who you were before? So we're thinking a lot about this now. There might have been people in your life when you were very young that were loving and caring, and you can go back and conjure them. That might be one way. Or thinking about the things that give you vitality, that whatever, it might be a lake or a guitar or whatever it is, and trying to really rebuild a self. So I feel like that's, in a way, creativity and identity is a really important job for us. Yeah.
Have there been moments that have sort of stood out to you where people have been able to recreate that person or create a new person?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I called it a new person. We had somebody come a few months ago who was not from up here, had come a long way, had never been on a subway, had never been to New York, and really had come from a very hard life. A lot of abuse, a lot of suffering, just was really kind of hard to listen to. Not hard to listen to, but painful, for us even. And, but just a kind of a really beautiful person with a lot of imagination and a capacity to love and connect, and you could see that right away. So he told this story. He had shame, but a family member was helping him pay for the treatment, and he was very, very grateful for that. And after, I guess, about a month or 6 weeks into recovery, he came in and he told us the story, and I was just looking out the window of the apartment of this family member, and he said the child had gone to school and she'd left like a trail, a mess of things all over the apartment. He said, and I just felt this pleasure, like picking up after her and looking out at the fog. And he said, I just felt alive. There was something about the connection to his family members in a different way, being of service in a different way, caring and tending. It was a really warm, and he goes, oh, I'm going to get all mushy now, so I'm not going to, so he wanted to stop. So that's, I think that was a change for him.
It's so interesting. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You're reminding me, I was just talking to a patient a couple days ago, and when, a new parent who's an amazing parent, but, there's a lot of rules in the house, and was about to, it's past your bedtime, and dad and her son were on the bed, and instead she just decided to jump on the bed, and her son kind of reached up and touched her face, and she felt kind of a chill over her body. And when we talked about that creative act of doing something a little different that your heart might want you to do, that's different than the rules. So I think that's a little what you're talking about too, is just doing something a little bit life-giving.
Yeah, totally. And also just this whole thing about connectivity to other people. I feel like that's in there too. There's a lot about creative collaboration and, you know, oh, well, you just sent us an
I
article.
must say this study. Can I say this
Yes,
amazing study from Germany just came out 2 days ago,
Yeah.
in which they looked at people who were either generating ideas with another person, with ChatGPT, with AI, or on an internet search. And actually, it was the people working with people who were able to generate the most ideas. And there's something in various different categories, that there was something unique about person and person, that were not only generating more ideas, but better ideas, more unique and more clever, at least until AI develops further probably, but yeah.
There's so much about
Yeah.
the relationship in so many things. I mean, for well-being, creativity, relationship is so protective, good relationships.
Well, I'm curious because you run groups down at Silver Hill, New York. So what are you seeing in terms of the creativity within the group dynamic? And I know this is something you've written on as well.
Yeah. Well, I think that what I'd like to say about that is that the spontaneous emotional response to another person, the capacity to open up and feel safe opening up and share very deep and painful things, and then to have other people in the moment move towards you with body language, with words, that it's something warm and connected is created in the room. And I feel like that's our job. Like if we can try to make that happen for people, that's our job, because they can take that elsewhere. And maybe they've been in a situation where they've been lonely, or they've been alienated, or they've been criticized. So I feel like the interpersonal creativity, is one thing, but also we've had a lot of musicians. So we brought in a guitar, and we asked people to play, and there were a couple of people that were quite accomplished. So when a couple of the groups, we asked them to share things that they had made or composed, and it was a very interesting thing to see. There was a lot of almost lightness, because we were hoping to sort of bring that vitalized self into the room, that creative self, and it was inspiring for other people. So.
And you've written on sort of the group process in improv and in development. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I have. Groups are crazy. Crazy things happen in groups, and all kinds of creative things can happen in groups. But a group can really come together, and part of what an improv ensemble does is to learn, how do we work together, how do we play little parts, how do we play big parts. They'll warm up together for 2 hours at a time playing Zip or these different games, just to kind of get in sync and synchronize, which is also a wild neuroscience. That's the science of synchronicity that's emerging in terms of studying kind of bats that hang together, signal together, and my favorite study of people in PET scanners actually playing one sentence at a time and saying yes and adding to the story on different continents, how their brainwaves kind of line up, and their experience of joy is greater than two people just reading something that's out of a book. Yeah.
And you and I talked about that study of jazz musicians.
Yes.
And it turned out when they were improvising, there was a lot more joy or dopamine firing or whatever than when they were playing by rote. So there's something about the playfulness, play as an adult, which is non-goal directed activity, where you're just making it up as you go. There's something about that is very useful for us.
But it also seems to be hard. It's very hard. And I don't know, my experience as a non-artist perhaps is that it's a very vulnerable act to sort of come into a group and play and create. And so I'm curious, sort of, given that we all work with patients that are complex and quite sick, sort of, what are the limitations of creativity, and how do you work around those in a therapeutic setting?
The saying is used a lot. I mean, I think you have to meet people where they are. And I think that whatever small step somebody can take that might be a little bit risky for them, but that might move them forward a little bit. So that could be, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we don't want to force people to make something or produce something or bring something new into being. Like, you don't have to. You can be in an art class and not make a picture if you don't want to, you know. So it's a letting. It's a non-controlling kind of perspective. I think that is important. Just because so many times we have these restrictions and inhibitions and rules and shoulds, and they're saying in psychoanalysis the tyranny of the shoulds. You know, we try to we try to move that out of the way. You know, so something fresh and real can come up for the person.
There's a great TED Talk that I saw of Elizabeth Gilbert. Elizabeth Gilbert, the author who wrote City of Girls, and she had just written Eat, Pray, Love. I think that's what it's called. And it went viral, and she was suddenly famous under 40, and she then was plagued with like, well, I want to write for another 40 years, but probably my best work is behind me. And on this TED Talk, I'm riffing off of what you're saying, Carrie. She said the problem is we think we're the creative ones, and it's up to us. But that's just kind of a Renaissance and post-Renaissance idea, that the ancient Greeks and Romans had a whole different idea about this. The Greeks said that there were daemons that gave us spirits, and the Romans said there were geniuses. And she says, I believe that there are elves in my walls. And poets all say this, right? And novelists say that they grabbed a story that was coming their way. And so she said, so it's only half me. The rest of the job is up to the spirit around me. And so as long as I show up, that's pretty good. I show up, and then the geniuses, they have to do their job. And if they don't, it's their fault. So this is like an interesting way to like get yourself out of the thing about like, I'm not creative, but you know, it's really the question of like, can we try?
Yeah, totally. And I think there's a book, I forgot, I think the title is Eminent and Everyday Creativity, it's something like that. But certainly there are eminent creators. I mean, Picasso, Bruce Springsteen, whoever. And, but, you know, we can still be an everyday creator. And I think it's important, and it really just has to do with having a more spontaneous or letting kind of perspective for yourself, seeing where organically you might go, and not put too much pressure on yourself to produce something beautiful. Because you know, I hear this from people a lot. Like, I want to learn to play the guitar. I want to, you know, do watercolors, but I'm just so bad. And the learning process can be kind of humiliating. But then there's a whole issue of the creative habit, right? So if you just like have a structure and you show up for yourself and try this thing, and maybe go out, like Julia Cameron recommends in The Artist's Way, you know, maybe go out and look at museums or write out your pages in the morning. But keeping it in your consciousness and in your identity, just even for a little bit, you are creative, and this is what you want to learn to do or love to do.
Well, it doesn't escape me. You're both creators yourself, having written multiple books, blog, et cetera. Sort of, can you share a little bit about your own creative process and sort of how you got to create?
Yeah, I could get a little emotional in the process, but I'll try. So I had read this book, Who Moved My Cheese, and I thought I could write a better book than that, and I could make a lot of money, and I could, you know, and so this was my first idea. Maybe I didn't do anything, and a month or two later, I was in a pretty serious car accident with my 3 kids in the back seat. They had been doing math problems. We were driving, and a 15-year-old T-boned us, and the car rolled over twice and spun, and then the windshield was in my lap. And but somehow we landed on the tires, and the steam was rising from the front of the car, and I didn't hear anything from the back seat anymore. And I said, "Are you guys okay?" And they said, "Yes, Daddy." And we opened the door and we walked away from the car. And I realized something just happened to me, and I got to figure out kind of what's the meaning of my life. I called Joanna, who's back there, my wife, and she was on the top floor of the VA hospital, and the elevator was stuck, and she couldn't get down. It was quite the scene. But I changed jobs, and then I started writing. like I wanted to, I was determined to write this book. And I wrote this book about these lemurs, and they were making pancakes. And I thought, this is the dumbest book anyone could ever write. This is like really just ridiculous. And then I thought, like, well, who's telling this story? And I said, oh, this is a father telling a story to his kids. I said, oh, what just happened to this father? Oh, he was in a car accident. And suddenly I kind of was getting kind of chills through my body, and this story was coming from somewhere else. And before I ever entered analysis, the month before, a close friend of mine had jumped off a bridge in Pasadena and had killed himself. And I started thinking about him really for the first time ever, and feeling kind of his presence up my spine. And I said, Steve, is that you? And I would get this resonance with me and him. And this book became kind of really a love story and saying goodbye to my friend. So that was my experience of how creativity kind of came through me, and the process of multiple layers of an onion and getting somewhere.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. How did you write a second book after that?
Yeah, so the second book was nonfiction, so it was, I wrote with my friend Dan, who was my improv teacher, and we realized, why do people come to improv classes? And we started realizing people are looking for meaning and meeting and community, and so we started writing about that and how we can unscript our life, and yeah, so that was kind of a less intense process. Yeah.
Amazing. What was your process like?
So I was an English major, and I liked to read a lot when I was a kid, and I always wanted to write, but I really didn't think I could. And I had friends who were really excellent at it, and I just thought, well, I'm not going to do that. But I've never really understood this, but after both, so I have 3 children, and one was born in 93, and the others were born in 2002, the twins. And I had these surges after having babies. I don't know what happened. I was like writing on napkins. It was like I had to write all the time. And I felt, I don't know. And then I started to feel somewhere along the line, I took a class or whatever, but I started to notice there was an absolute shift in my sense of well-being when I was writing. It was really that simple. And then I found something by Joyce Carol Oates. She said she could be in the worst mood ever, and just going to the typewriter, and then it was the typewriter, the act of writing changed everything. So for me, that's what really happened. And I just felt like that, and I held on to that process really, really tightly. And then I moved to Texas, and I started doing education. So I started putting it into like designing, classes and things. So that was fun too, but it didn't have, I guess a couple of those classes did feel that way, but there's something very deep and almost euphoric for me at times when I was writing. So I don't know what to say. I believed it. It works if you can find that thing that you really love to do. So
On that note, I think I'm supposed to switch to audience questions. Is that correct?
oh, yeah.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions from the audience? Yes, please.
Can I say something about that? I just think that's beautiful.
We repeat the...
Yeah, I think you're saying that creativity has something to do with what do I want, moment to moment, and that is how we can begin to transform our lives. I think that's right on, and so it can involve not a major portrait or a work or something, but actually, for me, like a walk in the evening. I'm going to go do this, and it can these things we can add to our lives can have profound meaning, and can say like, I want to do this, and look what I'm doing. I'm walking at night. Yeah. Is there something that you're thinking of that?
Well, it reminds me of a comment that you made of sort of the distinction between creativity in isolation versus creativity in a group. I don't know if you wanted to comment on sort of what you're seeing of sort of patients being able to sort of focus on just generating in and of themselves versus that group process.
Well, yeah, definitely want to comment on that. But I was just want to comment on what you were saying because like Jeff, I agree with you because Abraham Maslow, who did the pyramid about, people are familiar with that. So he had to I think he came up with the phrase self-actualization. I'm not sure if he was the one who did, but people are nodding. Like, it's that idea of really coming into who you really are and following those intuitions and those organic leanings. I think that's kind of what you're describing. And Maslow really did sort of equate those two things, self-actualization and creativity. So I think you're, totally on target with that. I mean, in terms of the care at Silver Hill and what we're trying to understand in people that we care for and help them think about how they're going to imagine their lives going forth. I don't know why it doesn't seem like a great analogy, but the Marie Kondo book, Tidying Up, when she goes into the closet and she's like, okay, do you get a spark of joy when you look at this shirt? Like, it's the same thing when you move through your life or you move through relationships. Like, when does your heart like take a leap a little bit? That's out of a Wordsworth poem, I think. There's something about leaping hearts. I don't know. But anyway, yeah. So I feel like for us, I think to put those two things together, the group, so I feel like the first thing is making people really safe in those relationships as much as we can. And when there's an interpersonal safety, I feel like when people have that, the next thing is going deeper into yourself. And then when you're going deeper into yourself, then you're finding out what does spark joy for you or what does give you vitality. And trying to understand that. So that's I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but that's kind of how I like to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it begs the question for me of sort of what is the generative or creative process for you as a psychiatrist or as an analyst, sort of working with patients, building that trust? How do you think about that?
Well, I see Andrew out there, thinking about our psychoanalytic training. I feel like that is the basis of psychoanalytic training. It's really to create this expanded self that is able and not afraid to feel what it feels, to love what it loves. There's like a Mary Oliver poem, you only have to love what you love. I love that line. You only have to love what you love. No one can tell you what you should love or who you should love. So I feel like psychoanalysis, and creativity is just about that self that can be itself.
What are your thoughts on sort of the intersection between creativity and the psychoanalytic or therapeutic work that you do?
In a minute. So the first thing that comes to mind is just this film that I've seen 1,000 times of Edtronic still face experiment of a mother and infant gazing at each other and going back and forth. That we are born to connect, and that's what psychoanalysis can kind of bring us back to, or a good therapeutic relationship of somebody being with us and holding us in their mind and responding to us. And you can just see a mother and an infant going back and forth, and then the mother is told to stop smiling at the baby, and we feel the pain, and that is what happens in our world, is we don't get responded to. So to have, and then we can see the repair when she's told to respond to the baby again. So I think to have an experience of being responded to and held in another person's mind and cared about is the greatest gift that a human being can receive. And so I think a good therapy can really do that. I also think that psychoanalysis, a good psychotherapy makes room for kind of a dream life. And I think dreams are a pretty good creative playground in terms like, well, what was that? And let's figure that out. And it kind of came from beyond my script. So let's figure out what this could mean. And I think that's also a muse, a place of creative muses.
Yeah. Other questions or comments from the audience? Yeah, please.
The things are the creative process and the self-criticism about it, or from other people. Uh-huh. Yeah, I do have ideas about that. When I wrote this novel, it was 180,000 words, and then I met these different agents who said, "Oh no, you're a first author. It can only be 80,000 words. You have to cut 100,000 words out of that book." Oh my gosh, it was so fun. Like, just rip it out. But I realized it's like a different part of your brain to do that. And so it's, I think, a little skill to separate those two parts of your mind. The part that's actually putting it out there, playing on the page, knowing that the editor's waiting and lurking to come. But they can't be there at the same time. They're both important functions. So the editor's got to wait and take its turn, and then it's going to get to play and shape it. That's kind of one just little metaphoric way of how I think about it, and I don't know if that's helpful at all. And the other thing I would say is, like, I really do love improvisational theater. I love it so much, and I hate performing more than anything. I'm not so good at it. So I really love the applications of it, of improvising, of riffing like we are right now. But getting up and being funny and making people laugh, that's not a thing. Then a whole different part of my brain gets activated. That's not part of the creative process. That's performing. So I think, like you were saying earlier, creativity for its own sake and making can really spark your life and shape who you are. But these other, like, am I good enough? Is the audience responding? What do I think of it? These are all different functions that have to take their turn. Is what I can say. I don't know if that's helpful, but
Yeah, I was going along with that. I feel like it's so much about the process, like helping people figure out a process that they love rather than an outcome they're trying to achieve. It's great to have a goal, and it's great to achieve excellence, but it's probably even better to, like, want to wake up in the morning and do something that you really want to do. So finding a process that you want to engage in, I think, and so whatever anybody thinks, however anybody judges whatever work you make, I mean, who's to know? I mean, sometimes I guess there's clear excellence, but sometimes critics and judges don't always know, So I think it's just giving yourself the gift of your own process.
One other thing you're making me think of too is that I was in New Mexico for a long time. We raised our kids there, and there was a big conference there called Creativity and Madness. It was a week-long conference. So those things are kind of associated a little bit, and the stories of the great creatives and kind of what happened to them. And so I think it's a good thing what you're saying is, like, creativity is a great thing, and so is, like, paying our bills or doing our homework or, doing the dishes, or whatever other regular old things we got to do as people that ground us. And so I think, like you're saying here, like, creativity probably has its place and its time of day even, and its role. But I think an integrated life has just the boring stuff too, and, like, needing to exercise and all the other demands that everyone tells us to stay healthy. So I think it's good to, keep creativity in its lane.
Thanks for sharing that. That's really lovely to hear. I'm wondering, do you know the term flow? The term flow, yeah, it sounds like that's a little bit what you're describing, like when you sort of become one with what you're doing. Like, I guess athletes have that, or surgeons have that, certain artists have that, and it sounds like that's what was happening. I mean, and if we can get that anywhere, I think in our lives, it's great. So thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I have a lot, a lot of thoughts about that. So two comments that I heard over my career. So a person that I treated in psychoanalysis, when he ended, he said, you know, one really important thing I got out of this is that I realized that even if I only have 5 minutes, I can start a paper. He was an academic. So there's a sense that you can inhabit a creative mentality in 5 minutes. You may not be able to do more than a sentence or two, but you've held on to that piece of yourself that's connected to that process. And then I was running a panel many years ago on writers on writing, or I forgot even what we called it, creativity in writing. But one of the writers said, the important thing is to just, even if you only have 5 minutes, just write every day. Because if you just don't, because you say, I can't, because I don't have an hour, I don't have half an hour, then you're going to lose that thing in your head or in your being that's connected to that process. So it's just doing it a little bit. I mean, anything. You know, like scratching out a sentence or taking some watercolors and, you know, I don't know, even if you don't paint, just throw some color on a paper just to keep yourself in that part of yourself. I don't know if that makes sense. It doesn't have to be more than 5 minutes.
Another thing that happens is we can be like reactive to things all day long. So I think this is what you're describing, or my sense of it is like, I have to do this and this person, and they've texted me, and I got to get back to this person, and I got this project due, and all these different things. It's all like a reaction, and then I don't know what's coming from me anymore. So it is really great if you can find a way early in the morning or late at night or whenever it might work, to just have some kind of proactive experience where you're putting yourself out there in some way, even if it's the ideas you have, just writing them down or playing around with it. I'm just saying, I'm worth it. I'm worth this 5 minutes, like Kiri's saying, to put it down and just have this experience of being proactive and not getting kind of tunnel vision with all the things that I have to do.
Yeah, it's playful and lighthearted. Yeah, totally. Oh. Yeah, that's great. That's great. It's nice. It's nice. You know, it makes me think, yeah, how much of it too is having company when we're doing something, or you know, or the community. Certainly, there's a place for solitude and creativity, but it just seems there's the pleasure often does come from someone being with you in it.
Yeah, it's not your typical creativity. Well, I think when I was first starting my company, I had sort of a number of years out of treatment and was in finance for a while, which is very anti-creative in many ways. And one of my fellow former patients sort of came to me, and I was stuck with, how do you design a program that actually is innovative? How do you think about really bringing creativity into treatment? And specifically treatment for patients like me that have a really hard time getting treatments that work. And I was sort of being very rote about it because I had come from finance. I was like, well, you know, you do this and you do this, and it was all bullet points. And she's like, no. She's an artist. She's like, no, you have to go back to that headspace when you were really ill yourself. You have to get back in touch with that person and really sort of relive those experiences and think about, what did you need back then? Who were you back then? What would you have wanted to hear? And I think, you know, a lot of what business is really meeting your clients where they're at. And, you know, a lot of what building a program is meeting your clients where they're at. And I think it really helps to sort of think about yourself and use yourself as inspiration for, what did you need? Where were you? So that's my little bit of creativity, is sort of thinking through getting back in touch with what it means to be in distress, and what does it mean to actually do the steps to get better, and finding that authentic self that maybe might connect with a few other people. So
I just have to say, Lindsay, I mean, Lindsay built a really beautiful program at Silver Hill called the Mental Health Intensive, and you created that. It's unusual, and it's, you know, it's different, and maybe, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you can tell people about it, because I think it could be useful. It's a discovering the self kind of program.
yeah, so I mean, my ultimate recovery was thanks to sort of stopping looking at diagnostic labels quite so hard and really looking at underlying understanding of who I was as a person, what my identity was, and how my relationships functioned with others, something we call personality. Sort of, what is your unique strategy for navigating the world to meet your needs? And our philosophy is that we all develop personalities and strategies for navigating the world, and they're really effective at times, and perhaps they're no longer so effective. And so if we really spend time to dig deep into what is our strategy, how is it working for us, and how is it not working for us so well anymore, we can start to really see ourselves from the outside in, and start to rebuild strategies that are maybe more effective for us, and build a vision for who we can become. And I think there's a little creativity in that.
A lot. I think a lot. Yeah.
Well, in the vision building for the self, yeah. So, and figuring out what we want out of life, but yeah. And one of the things we're thinking about is sort of, how do we bring creativity more? We do art therapy for sure, but, you know, how do we bring more creativity into our programming? So I don't know if you wanted to, I think we're at time. Are we supposed to? Oh, we could, okay, cool.
Actually, yeah, I've been thinking about this.
Yeah.
So when I was at Del Med, you know, during COVID, we created a program. We were asked to create a program for people to show up for the community and, I don't know, just do something. So we brought in artists. So we brought in, like, you know, a filmmaker and a poet and someone who'd written an opera, and an arts education person who brought in a painting and talked to people about it. And it was something about being lifted into this other world, into this culture, and listening to somebody who's an expert and seeing how, I don't know, their identity is very strong, and their you know, thoughts are clear about what they're doing. So in and of itself, just that hour, people said it was calming. That was the you know, the feedback that we got. But we're thinking about this now for Silver Hill, and you know, we have art therapy, and we love that, and you know, people do work. You know, the art therapist guides them through, you know, making things. But what would it be like to have an expert musician come in when we have musicians in our group and talk about, share, what they do and how they do it. So I think that can be therapeutic, even if you're a spectator and an observer, it's inspiring, so.
There's a film that I would recommend everybody see. You can look it up on YouTube. We've seen it with our undergraduates recently, called Heaven is a Traffic Jam on the 405. It's a beautiful, beautiful film about someone struggling with serious mental illness and discovering the arts. She was actually in the improv program, but she met a sculptor and she began to get involved with sculpting, and she actually started to do 10 to 20 foot sculptures of her analyst,
Oh, wow.
who was a colleague of mine and a fairly private person. And she then took these busts into galleries in Beverly Hills and West Hollywood, and they were on display. This is a very compelling film about the impact of creativity and mental illness, and 5 years ago won Best Documentary at the Academy Awards.
Yeah.
So it was quite a miraculous film. It's like going into the day of in the life of somebody struggling with mental illness, and then watching them find themselves through the arts, and her humor and her self-reflection is just remarkable. 40 minutes. Heaven is a Traffic Jam on the 405.
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
Well, I think the takeaway might be that anybody can find a little bit of creativity.
Yeah.
And it's therapeutic, so awesome. Well, thank you all
Coming.
so much for coming. Really appreciate it. Great questions.
I just want to thank everybody again for coming. Don't forget that the library is here for you as well. There's a lot of programs, a lot of creative programs. If you go down to the main lobby in the new materials room, we have a community puzzle. There's coloring sheets for people to have conversations and color, sewing programs, and a lot of other things. So sign up for the newsletter. New Canaan also has a great library that has a lot of creativity. Norwalk, most of your local libraries are going to offer something like that. So thank you all for coming.